about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview.
The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning and happy Friday, April 4th. And, while we've been talking about all the successes of the Trump mandate and how, the country is on a way better bent now and direction because of DOJ and all of the executive orders and all of these things, evil is still persisting, particularly in blue states that are still run by these woke leftists who will stop at nothing to destroy individual liberty and rights, particularly for parents and children, because they don't believe in the nuclear family. They don't believe in the institution of the church or the family as God ordained it. They simply want the craven power of the government and the civil government, of course, God ordained, but gave specific limited powers as well for civil government to act within its legitimate authority that comes from God himself. So the left, of course, is trying to destroy the church, destroy the family, and wield the powers of government in an illegitimate way. And no better example this week than a new Colorado bill, my former home state, and this will give you a pretty good indication why I moved and just said, I'm done. I want to come to the free state of Florida. But a new Colorado bill that would forcefully remove children from parents who misgender them. This is utterly absurd. My friends at The Dissenter said this: one of the most tyrannical pieces of legislation in American history isn't coming from Washington, D.C. It isn't being shoved down our throats by some bloated federal agency. No, the epicenter of this legislative grotesquerie, I love that word, I'm going to start using that, grotesquerie, is none other than Colorado, where the state has decided to go full Orwell and redefine reality, speech, and parenthood. Well, Colorado decided to go full Orwell years ago. This is just the latest manifestation. But basically, if parents misgender their toddlers, then the state somehow has a legitimate interest under this legislation to come in and forcefully remove them under some pretext of harm. Utterly ridiculous. Let's welcome in Katie Faust, who is the president of Them Before Us and also hosts an amazing podcast right here on the American Family Radio Network each and every Sunday. Katie, this is just so bad. Where do you want to start to pick apart why, beyond just the obvious, this is so bad?
Well, I think that it is absolutely good and right to be up in arms about this, to recognize that it is, like you said, sort of advancing this Orwellian idea about the nature of reality. All of that is true. The whole transgender lie was really forcing on Americans a ideology that was incongruent with reality, and then saying, you're bigoted if you don't go along with it. So I think that all of us have this sort of visceral response to are you kidding me? Don't push this on me. But what is going on at bottom here is actually something that connects to worldview in a way that everybody needs to understand. This is not just about how are we using words and what is the state going to do, if somebody's misgendering or deadening or, all of these sort of illusions of harm that they are now going to place into law. Really what we need to understand is these kinds of questions come down to a fundamental disagreement about the answer to the question, to whom do children belong? So that, especially in the education world and in the parental rights world, that is the dividing line. The question, to whom do children belong, is foundational to all of these different kind of culture war issues, these sparring matches that we're having in the legislature and in the schools. Now, the proper answer, to whom do children belong, the proper answer to that is to their parents. Children belong to their parents because those two adults, their own mother and father, are statistically the most connected to, invested in, and protective of them. It is those two adults who have known them the longest, who have the greatest interest in their future, and who are going to be there when something goes wrong in the future, the activists won't, the teachers won't, the doctors won't, the Planned Parenthood clinic technician administering testosterone to their 12-year-old won't. It's parents. Parents have this long-term interest in children. So the correct answer to whom do children belong is they belong to their mother and father. But the left has a different answer. The left answers that question, to whom do children belong, and their answer is us. The children belong to us. You can hear it when President Biden said, they belong to all of us, or it takes a community, a village to raise a child, as if, right, there's some kind of social property, but they're not. However, pushing this idea and then pushing through legislation that is a manifestation of this idea that children belong to the state, to the government, to the schools, to the doctors, to the teachers, it's so drastically harmful. It's very, very hard to understate. So it's not just answering this question wrong is not just a problem for the parents who have a transgender, identified child in their home. This is a problem for every parent, because if children do not belong to you, the state will decide who they belong to. And your ideological, conflict with the progressive, leaders is going to come into play there in a way that should be shocking and concerning for all of us.
Yeah, and you're so right to go back to the fundamentals of children in the context of families. And this is why, beyond just the absurdity that toddlers can change their pronouns and even know what that means from an epistemological framework, is utterly preposterous when they're still learning the mechanics of the world around them and the difference between dog and cat, and yet we think somehow that this is so enlightened to follow the pronouns. But really the point is, this is yet another way to destroy the family and to tell parents, you better treat your kids how the state demands. Otherwise, we will take them from you because we own their best interests, not you as parents. You can't make those decisions for yourself and for your family. So it is, you're absolutely right, Katie Faust, this is the whole idea of the parents are basically just the temporary babysitters for the state who has custody overall and can determine the best interests of the children. And that is a fundamentally flawed premise that we have to combat. And I hope that conservatives in Colorado get this, and that deeper framework is the issue that they argue in opposition to this bill, not just some of the top line sort of propositions and the way you might attack this head on. I think there's a much more sinister underlying worldview here that we're still seeing overall the left is pushing.
That's exactly right. And why is it so important for them to realign the natural affinity and connections of children away from their parents and towards the state? Well, they have recognized something that's eminently true, and that is that children are vulnerable and children are dependent, and they need to depend on somebody. Right? There is, from the design of our entire bodies and our growth and our development, humans are very vulnerable at both poles of their life, their very early life and their very later life. And they're going to be dependent on somebody. And so what progressives do, and obviously I know you know this, you've talked a lot about it, that it is really part and parcel of the progressive playbook, I would even say the Marxist playbook, to detach children from their parents, from the dependence that they have on their parents, and then reattach it to the state. Now, we are not seeing that in terms of now you must follow the great leader, the president or whatever, but they absolutely are trying to detach children from their parents through messages like, if your parents, quote unquote, dead name you, you're not, quote unquote, safe with them, right? Your parents might be unsafe. They may not validate your identity. Where can you be safe? You can be safe at school. You can be safe with these activists. We will put you in an LGBTQ safe house. You're safe with us. And so that kind of messaging has sowed a lot of mistrust between children and parents. And then you get the state that is now criminalizing or penalizing parents that do not go along with some of what their own children want to do. So this looks more mild, but it is absolutely a manifestation of what progressives have done, especially Marxists have done throughout the ages. You saw it in Mao's China, where he would co-opt the youth, and they would think of him as their true father, their great father, and that children would report on their parents if their parents fell out of line. I was just reading in scripture with my 15-year-old yesterday. We always read at the bus stop before he gets on the bus about how in the last days, you are going to be set family member against family member, and that parents and children are even going to come into conflict over the truth of Christ. And you see all of these Marxist governments and even the progressive efforts to separate parents from children, to weaponize the discord between parents and children, especially parents who are standing firm on the truth that Christ has passed down about the nature of our bodies and the goodness of male and female and the need for distinctions between male and female. And that those are very much anti-Christ positions, that Colorado has taken on, that Mao's China has taken on, that a variety of different Marxist governments all throughout the 20th century used as a political tool to advance their dystopic aims. And so we need to be aware and alert to this. And honestly, we need to fight because this goes very, very deep. It's a threat to all parent-child relationships.
Yeah, and it's so well said. I'm speaking with Katie Faust, who's the president of Them Before Us, and also has a podcast by the same name here at AFR. You can go to afr.net, click on the podcast tab, and find that. You need to listen to this so that you are grounded in the arguments in the biblical worldview for parents, parental rights, and the right to raise up a child in the way they should go, as Proverbs says, so that when they're older, they won't depart from it. And that is a responsibility that God has given to parents, and we cannot abdicate that to the state. And Katie, there's no way that Colorado actually thinks that this would survive a constitutional challenge. I mean, I know that they put out some really wild test legislation and test balloons, like trying to get rid of Trump off of the ballot, for example, and that was smacked down. But this one is just one that it seems so insane, yet they continue to push these things and see how far they will go. I mean, we have just in recent Supreme Court history had a number of cases come up to the Supreme Court on religious freedom issues. I mean, they're attacking the heart of rights and liberty specifically for Christians, and this is yet another one. And so they can't possibly think this will survive.
Well, you are the lawyer, and so I need to be tutored from you about exactly how all of this works. But I will say, I am so grateful for a separation of powers system that is at least has the possibility of keeping some of these anti-natural law premises in place. I mean, we have natural rights that are given to us by God, not by the state. The state does not grant us the right to parent our children. We have it naturally. We have it because that accords with natural reality, both in terms of a natural law philosophical sense, but also in terms of a biblical sense, and also in terms of a sociological truth that children and parents are connected to one another, that they have an investment and connection that is superseded by nothing, right? This is so primary, it's so foundational that it has to be guarded and protected. And that's actually the role of government, is to protect those fundamental natural rights, not to grant them to us, but to protect them. And so this is obviously an area where those fundamental rights, both for parents to their children and children to their parents, is in serious jeopardy. So I am so grateful that I pray that there will be some challenge. I mean, if this passes, which, oh my gosh, rise up, Colorado. But if it passes, I'm so grateful that we have a system that can examine and scrutinize it, and that I pray slap it down in such a way that no other state tries this again. But we will see. We will see, because, there have been some good rulings in terms of religious liberty, but there's been also some pretty troubling rulings from the Supreme Court in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity. So I don't necessarily know. I mean, you can tell me whether or not you think that that's the kind of thing that would be a slam dunk for parental rights or not.
Yeah, and I think, I would hope this would fail along the same ideological lines and recognition of natural rights, and also the line of precedent that that ultimately the best interest of the child is determined by the parents, and this is just so much a bridge too far. The concern, of course, is that you never want to test that, because if there is a day at the Supreme Court where somehow you get at least 5 justices who go, well, you know what, that there may be merit to that, then suddenly the entire landscape changes. And I think this is where the left is going, to continue to persistently have these types of bills that are targeting the erosion and complete destruction of the foundation of the family, which is, you know, the fulcrum of a moral and upright society. And without the traditional family, we get into a lot of other problems. And they're just hoping that if they continue to throw up everything against the wall, that something will stick, and that they can then build off of it from there. And so this is why it's incumbent upon all of us as conservatives, particularly Christians, to ensure that we smack all of these things down right away. And so if you're in Colorado, or you know someone in Colorado, encourage them to go and testify against this. Encourage them to call their state legislators. Encourage them to call even Governor Jared Polis and ask him to come out against this, because surprisingly for a Democrat, he's not as insane as some other blue state governors in terms of, you know, some policy. And this may be a bridge too far even for him. And if he said that he would veto this, if this came through the legislature, that would be a great step. But we have to know what's going on in all of these states, because ultimately it could affect even, me here in Florida, or wherever your state is, even if you don't live in Colorado. And so, Katie, closing thoughts on this, because I know you have to run, but how we need to continue to just hold the line for policy for parents, so that we protect the rights of the children. And I love the way that you frame this in your book, Them Before Us, and turn this whole paradigm shift around to say, this isn't just the desires of the parents or the state, much less than the parents, but this is all about protecting the natural rights as well of children.
Well, I love, that your call is so often for Christian engagement in the public square, and you're exactly right. Because we do have the only worldview. We are the only ones. We are the only people. With the evolutionists can't do this. The Marxists cannot do this. The secular humanists can't do this. Nobody has the correct perspective on the nature of what it means to be human, and therefore what it means to be a human child, to get to the point where you can properly articulate a defense, a holistic defense against bills like this. It has to be Christians who are engaging. It's actually a form of loving your neighbor to vocally oppose bills like this. It is a matter of child protection. And do not allow the left to gaslight you into thinking that the victims here are transgender adults or transgender children who do not get the treatments that they want. That is not true, right? The victims are the sterilization, mutilation that these children undergo in the name of transgender treatment. We have to protect them from the doctors, from the activists, from the hormones, and sometimes from their own parents who are misguided about what caring for someone who is gender confused looks like. You, Christian, must rise up and engage on this, because you are the only one with the worldview that is holistic and robust enough to fight it back.
Well, Katie Faust, really well said, and I so appreciate your advocacy in this space and for the fight. We need to ensure that we continue to protect kids, protect the rights of parents, protect natural rights that our founders recognized come from God, our Creator, not our government. Our government can't redefine the family, redefine parental rights, redefine best interests of the child, all of that nonsense. So again, this is coming through Colorado. Absolutely absurd on so many levels. But follow Katie Faust on X, as well as listen to her podcast at afr.net. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Share-a-thon is a special time to me for reasons beyond funding our ministry. During Share-a-thon, I'm reminded of the vital partnerships we have with listeners around the country. It's encouraging to hear the stories and have so many calls from people who have recognized what a blessing it is to be able to share a Christian perspective and the Word on AFR. God has blessed us with this platform, and we get to use it for the cause of Christ.
Spring Share-a-thon is coming April 8th through 10th. And it's your chance to renew your partnership with American Family Radio.
We deliberately don't receive any government support, so our listeners are essential to the funding and continued operations of this ministry. And in addition to operational capital, Share-a-thon renews the spirits of those of us who work here.
Join us April 8th through 10th for Spring Share-a-thon on American Family Radio.
They could not take his joy. Hey, it's Michael Woolworth with Bible League International, and I met 12-year-old Barack when I visited Tanzania, Africa. He is an albino, and if you suffer with albinism, you lack pigmentation in your skin, hair, and eyes, and in this part of the world where witchcraft is so prominent, witch doctors believe that someone like Barack is an evil spirit that must be destroyed. And so on the way to school one day, they cut off his left arm, took the fingers on his right hand, took his teeth, took his tongue, but they could not take his joy. Why? He is a born-again believer, and even though the father left the home many years ago, the mother Mary endeavored to raise him to know and love Jesus, and together they've learned to forgive through the hope of the gospel those that attacked him. And would you know it, 100 people have come to Christ, 2 of those former witch doctors who at one time sought to harm him. Look, we're sending Bibles to Africa. Hope is needed there, and you can be a part of this at only $5 a Bible. $100 sends 20. Call 800-YES-WORD. 800-YES-WORD. 800-YES-WORD, or give at sendbiblesnow.org.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starn. Stand by for news and commentary next. The controversy over a transgender volleyball player at San Jose State University is growing. At least 5 universities in the Mountain West Division have either forfeited matches or refused to compete. Now, the women's volleyball team at the University of Nevada, Reno is the latest to boycott. The ladies took a vote and opted not to compete against San Jose State. Now, the young man who is pretending to be a woman has been seen in multiple videos spiking the balls in the face of female opponents. And many of the female athletes say they have legitimate fears about their safety. The Nevada player said in a statement to Outkick Sports they will stand in solidarity with other female volleyball players, and they're also demanding their rights to safety and fair competition be upheld, and they refuse to put themselves in harm's way. Well done, ladies. Well, if you need a good laugh and a healthy dose of inspiration, check out my daily podcast. It's available at toddstearns.com.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back, and continuing the conversation of how evil never sleeps and this whole woke leftist ideology is not going away anytime soon, really, even though the terrible box office disaster that was Snow White and the leftism. And by the way, if you hadn't... I mean, there's all this controversy over Rachel Ziegler and how, she wanted Snow White to be a feminist, and then all of her comments and all of this other stuff, and then, the dwarves and whether that was, somehow dwarfist and all that. I was listening to a podcast from another conservative, and I haven't gone and seen this movie, but it's even worse than that, because apparently Disney was trying to redefine what it means to be the fairest one of all. It's literally like Snow White and her parents are in this sort of communist utopia, and they're fair by giving everybody the same government handouts. And so when we're talking about the fairest one of all, no, it's not about beauty standards. It's not about regular, princess culture. It's all about being the fairest, the most communist of them all, which is just another layer of total absurdity. So this thing tanked at the box office. Nobody asked for this. Nobody wants this. But the woke left is still trying to make fetch happen, right? And so this trans ACLU lawyer that you will recall made probably the worst argument at the U.S. Supreme Court just by virtue of this person identifying as trans. It's a woman, but pretending to be a man, and was advocating on behalf of the ACLU during the trans surgery nonsense, and that whole argument that of the Tennessee law that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court is back on PBS, suggesting that there are no cases of men and women's sports, and actually with a straight face, which I know is ironic, a straight face actually arguing that there are 0 examples of men and women's sports. Listen to this.
The policies that are claiming that transgender women in sports are men are wrong. The president is lying when he says that there are men impersonating women and participating in women's sports. There are no examples of men impersonating women that I am aware of. And it is incorrect to refer to transgender women and girls as men and boys. And what these executive orders do, what these laws do, is open the door to sex-based police.
Yeah, this is the American Civil Liberties Union employing the best and brightest legal minds. I mean, this is clearly a girl who is her own example of how a woman is trying to be a man, and yet she's never heard of Leah Thomas. I mean, just so absurd. But I want to get reaction from Gerard Folletti, who is senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. And Gerard, so much wrong with this and so much we could laugh at, but this is genuinely where the left is trying to go with codifying their worldview into law and setting precedent that is simply antithetical to reality. I mean, it's just as absurd, in my view, as trying to deny examples of gravity and saying the Supreme Court needs to recognize that gravity doesn't exist, and we're making all kinds of laws and legal precedent around that theory when it's just patently, observably false.
Well, isn't it funny, Jenna, that when the left talks about science, we should always follow the science when it comes to the environment, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to everything except biology. There, they can pick and choose what science is. They reject science. It becomes a matter of wish fulfillment. And unfortunately, that's not reality. Trans, however you choose to identify yourself, does not affect biological reality. And the legal system is fine with people choosing to name themselves or call themselves whatever they want. But when we're looking at the reality of something, we're looking and we see that there are two genders, male and female. That's what science reflects, and that is what the legal system will acknowledge. So this lawyer who is arguing, I'm not even sure what they're arguing. It's ridiculous. It's a denial of science and a denial of reality, but that doesn't make for policy that a court can enforce. That makes for wish fulfillment, that we are steadily rejecting as a nation as being unhealthy.
Yeah. And this is just, it shows how, politics is downstream from culture, and we all know that from Andrew Breitbart, but also that law, unfortunately, sometimes is downstream from culture as well. And hopefully this sort of, runaway, ridiculous, politically attenuated federal bench will not succeed in somehow codifying in precedent this type of absurd view of reality. And so when we talk about the courts, and when we're talking about things like men and women's sports, all of these things legislatively that will ultimately be challenged in the courts and all the way up to the Supreme Court, where are we at in the legal framework of still at least basing judicial opinions on reality?
Well, I think we're still at a place right now where judges have been, and I'm cautious in saying this, but siding with reality. I think that judges have been deferring to the way that the Trump administration is choosing to go back to traditional definitions of gender as they apply to Title IX, to other provisions of federal law that prevent discrimination or are meant to address discrimination on the basis of gender. And judges are giving deference to the traditional and realistic notion of two genders. We do see outliers. We do see cases where judges seem to be leaning more liberal and come out with more outlandish ideas. But as a whole, the judiciary is conservative. The judiciary sticks to tradition with what people can understand. And I think that they are giving proper deference to the government's, the Trump administration's reinterpretation of what gender is and what gender protection is, which is the traditional view of men and women. And when you have men, biological men and women's sports, the administration is arguing, rightly so, that violates the civil rights protections of women, and that should not be allowed. And judges are seeing, I think, they're increasingly favorable to this view.
Yeah, which is why the whole Bostock opinion made absolutely no sense to read into the term sex, which was clearly meant to protect the biological difference between men and women, sexual orientation, and gender identity, because that just obliviates the need to even have sex as a protected class. And I hope that you're right that we will get more jurists through the Trump administration and federal appointments that just simply recognize reality. I mean, the bar is so low, if that's what we're hoping for, to say just please at least recognize reality, and that'll get us to a lot of the right opinions from the judiciary. But I want to also ask you about this case. The Supreme Court hears arguments in a case this week against South Carolina removing Planned Parenthood from Medicaid programs. So this coming from the Post-Millennial. The Supreme Court heard arguments on Wednesday in a case out of South Carolina stemming from an executive order signed by Governor Henry McMaster directing the state's Department of Health and Human Services to remove abortion clinics like Planned Parenthood from the state's Medicaid provider list. So while federal law prohibits Medicaid funding from going toward paying for abortions, many Medicaid patients in the state seek out the clinic for care, arguably, such as cancer screenings, pregnancy testing, and contraceptions, per the Associated Press. And in South Carolina, there are just 2 Planned Parenthood clinics. So with those arguments, where is the court at least by what we can garner from how oral arguments went?
Well, I think what we saw from oral arguments is that the court is looking at this very narrowly. They're not looking necessarily at the broader question of abortion providers and whether they should or should not be included in under Medicaid funding, but they're looking more narrowly at whether an individual has the right to challenge through a lawsuit what providers are available to that person under Medicaid. So that's a much narrower question. It's one requiring interpretation of what Congress meant, and when a person can select their doctor, or whether they can select their doctor, whether that's being provided, and whether the answer to that is litigation or an administrative process, which tends to be more deferential to the state's interpretation. So ultimately, this is going to turn on whether people have the right to begin with to sue over this provision, to go to the provider of their choice, or whether this is something that is within the province of a state to say, no, we're going to limit where Medicaid money goes, and it's not going to go to abortion providers.
Yeah, and hopefully the Supreme Court will see that that is something that the state ultimately, if they're providing those dollars, can direct that. But was there any discussion overall of this whole, I believe, false premise that this whole argument is predicated on, that clinics like Planned Parenthood actually provide a plethora of other services? I mean, we've seen from a lot of data that, it's something like 97% of services, maybe, 3% go to something else other than abortion. And so it seems like this is being argued anyway on a false premise that this is a provider that, people need for other types of services. Did that factor into this at all? Or, are we going to have any more light shed on the truth of what Planned Parenthood is really all about?
Well, I think that we're not going to have that much light shed into it, but it did raise interesting arguments. We do see these arguments in Planned Parenthood all the time, and this was no exception, that they're essential in providing services other than abortion or life-affirming services is what they actually have a goal to call it at some points, that they provide these services as an essential service that patients cannot get anywhere else or cannot get easily. Now, I think what we're seeing truthfully is that that's not correct, that people can get services other than abortion, some other providers, and that Planned Parenthood is really grasping at straws to justify their existence as the country turns increasingly for life and against the murder of unborn children. But I don't think that this is ultimately what the court's going to decide on. It's going to be a narrow technical issue. It's certainly interesting because it shows how desperate Planned Parenthood is to redefine what it does in order to keep going with the services that Americans seem to disfavor now.
Yeah, well, Gerard Folletti, this will be very interesting to see the outcome of this and, where the Supreme Court is going with it. We're going to take a break here, but I'm going to hold you over to the next segment so that we can continue to talk about a couple of other headlines in this same vein. So we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
The recent tornado outbreak has devastated so many people in the Midwest and the South. 8 Days of Hope is ready to deploy their rapid response ministry to Cave City, Arkansas and Tylertown, Mississippi from March 20th to April 5th in order to help those impacted restore what's been destroyed. If you're 18 or older, you can help. Visit 8daysofhope.com to find out how you can volunteer. This is an urgent need. Visit 8daysofhope.com today.
Learning University.
That wasn't stereo right there, fellas.
That's jumbled.
We were struggling.
The bumblebee was called the humblebee. Is that true?
Chicken legs are also called drumsticks.
Yeah, that's not a good ice cream flavor. They've got some little tiny saddles that they put on those dragons. Unfortunately, you can only ride them once.
Because then they turn around and take your leg off. Hey, Andrew, you want to ask it?
I'm so excited about getting on. I missed my exit.
Friday mornings at 10 Central on American Family Radio.
Hello, this is Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Hey, we've got some very average tours lined up for you in 2025. And so if you are interested in any one of these, we would love for you to join us. Again, the food will be so-so. We're using yellow school buses this time. And we're not making reservations at any of the places we're going, so it'll be hit and miss. But if you just like to live on the wild side when you tour, then we got a tour for you in 2025. We're going to Williamsburg, we're going to Washington, D.C., and we're going to Boston. Williamsburg and D.C. in June and September, and Boston in October. For all the information on these tours, go to wildmangroup.com, WILDMON group.com, and there you can find out if I'm really serious. I'm just kidding, folks. These are going to be outstanding tours that you're going to want to go on with us.
Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who fear God, men of truth. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Due to recent events, a question has arisen as to whether impeachment is an appropriate response to a judicial decision. In an op-ed for the Washington Times, AFA Action Senior Counsel Philip Juregi explained, the first federal judge impeached and removed from office was Judge John Pickering in 1804 for a ruling in a case that defied the law. The articles of impeachment charged that Pickering ruled, quote, said act of Congress not regarding, but with intent to evade the same, end quote. The generation that drafted and ratified the impeachment and removal provisions knew them and understood them best.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back, and I'm still talking with Gerard Folletti, who is senior counsel at the Lawfare Project, and you can follow him on X at Gerard Folletti and see other media hits that he does with really good commentary. I know he has to actually go on other media besides ours, but I'm always grateful when he joins our show and provides a brilliant analysis. And I want to get your take, Gerard, on this story that really smacked of fake news in the midst of Trump's immigration and deportation promises to have mass deportations. There was this whole controversy over Maryland Dad and how, this guy who has been a loving father and all this from Maryland is suddenly being deported to El Salvador. And the left, of course, doesn't tell the full story that he actually is alleged to be an MS-13 gang affiliate. Not sure if he's actually a member, but at least affiliated with us. And he got due process pretty substantively, and his appeal was denied back in 2019 when that court, the appellate chief, said that we adopt and affirm the immigration judge danger ruling, which is basically that the immigration judge determined that he was a verified member of MS-13. So, in my view, this guy deserves deportation. El Salvador can deal with him. And the left, though, is focusing on, well, he's a loving father. Okay, if you're a loving father, but you're also part of MS-13, maybe you should have thought about that and chosen loving father instead of MS-13. But this just goes into the whole problem of how the left is trying to evoke the sob stories and the emotion and the humanitarian blah, 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 instead of focusing on the actually violent criminals and, some of these these alleged gang affiliations, and supporting Trump's immigration plan.
You're absolutely right. This is the left is pulling at Americans' heartstrings. They're arguing that this guy is this innocent, this Maryland dad. I'm surprised they're not calling him Captain America at this point. And you also have similar things happening with all these deportees who are terrorist supporters and terrorizing American college campuses, breaking the law. And you see how Americans are lining up to support them from the left, saying that, these poor people are being punished for their speech. They're political prisoners. They're loving fathers and family members. Well, that's nice, but that still doesn't change the fact that they are breaking the law and they're subject to deportation. And the left is using any arguments it can when it sees that the law is not on their side, and that the immigration law specifically is written in such a way that it gives the government much more leeway to deport people than it would need, for example, if it were a regular criminal proceeding to convict them. So they're not winning the legal argument. They're turning to this heartstrings argument and really trying to change the law or the interpretation of the law by appealing to emotion instead of to reason.
Yeah, and there's been a big controversy over this because, the government has now admitted there were some administrative errors. And I say, alleged that he's an MS-13 gang affiliate because, to be clear, there are even conservatives that are arguing that Vice President J.D. Vance falsely said this guy was a convicted MS-13 member. But for purposes of deportation and the fact that he was here illegally, to me, it doesn't even really matter. If he can't defend that he's not a danger to society, or whether or not that's even a question, if you're here illegally, you shouldn't, in my view, have any measure of due process because you broke the law in getting here. You're automatically subject to deportation, and we need to change all of these amnesty loopholes that say, well, come in and while we're determining your amnesty status, you can still take up residency here. It's like, no, maybe file that claim, but you can't come into the United States and then, go off for 4 or 5 plus years while your amnesty status is being potentially determined. And so this guy, while the left is also beyond the Maryland dad sort of false statement, in my view, it's also attempting to turn on the fact that apparently he wasn't actually convicted of being a gang member, but the court did find that he is a danger and he hadn't proven otherwise, and that he was at least an affiliate. But the whole point, Gerard, I think, is that he's here illegally. So what does all of this rhetoric even matter?
I think that the reason this rhetoric matters is we have become accustomed in the last 2 or 3 decades to ignoring immigration law. We've gone from legal arguments, which you are absolutely right. The ultimate issue here is this person should never have been here at all. It doesn't matter that he's a loving dad and he has children, and that when he's not busy being an affiliate of a gang, he might as well be a reasonable and respectful American. Except he's not. He's not here legally. He should never have been here to begin with. And all these arguments that he's a loving dad, they're meant to show where we've gone with the immigration system. Back in the day, if you came to the United States without a visa, you were detained. Unless you were fleeing from a communist country, in which case you were integrated into society, but that was a policy decision, you were detained pending your hearing, pending determination of what to do with you. Over the years, we've gotten, the liberals have won this position that we're going to let you into society and maybe you'll show up for a court hearing, maybe you won't, we don't really care. They turned a blind eye to all this. And now that we're starting to realize that doesn't work, that that's destroying our country, now that we're starting to actually enforce our immigration laws, that's causing these emotional discussions on, he's a loving dad. That's not the point. We're at this point because the liberals created a system where they're giving people the illusion of rights where none exist. And that's causing legal problems today.
Yeah, and when did, he's a loving dad become a defense for coming here illegally? I mean, that literally has no rational or legal relationship to the fact that he's here illegally, and yet that's what the left would like to go to. And then this gets into the broader conversation that we've been having for a number of weeks now, Gerard, about the overall problem with judicial activism and some of these federal judges who are clearly basing their opinions on policy preferences and political preferences rather than confining themselves to actually the Article 3 mandate. And so the Trump administration, I think, is at a crossroads now when they're trying to enforce what is well within the executive's purview under their Article 2 authority, for immigration policy and enacting that, and a judiciary that seems intent on thwarting them, not only on this, but any other policy that these judicial activists disagree with. What's the best course of action right now for Trump to have a workaround, remove these judges, or have some kind of solution other than allowing them to simply stymie the rest of his administration for the next 4 years?
I wish I were smart enough to answer that question or to have the foresight to what would actually work, but unfortunately, I don't think there is a very good workaround right now. I like the fact that Trump is being aggressive, that he is pushing the law and that he's not backing down when he sees that activist judges are getting it wrong. He's not saying, oh, okay, I'm going to try something else. He's pushing it. He's appealing. He's using his powers as president to still enforce the law while leaving it up to the courts and the appellate process to play out. I don't know if that's going to work for him in the long run. To be honest, it's going to be the Supreme Court that weighs in on a lot of these issues, and they may not do so until towards the end of Trump's presidency. I don't think the Supreme Court will undo what Trump is doing for the most part. So I think that the judicial activism we're seeing at a lower level, not at the highest level. But ultimately, I think there is a need for a reform on how some of these federal courts work. Having a judge in the middle of nowhere issue an injunction that blocks the entirety of the federal government from operating based on one case, I think we all see that as problematic. I think we may need specialized courts. I think we may need more guidance from Congress on what courts can do when they're looking at the use of executive power. I think that we've allowed the courts right now to have way too much power. They're exerting way too many checks, more than balances, on the executive, and that is something we should rightly all be concerned about.
Yeah, and having these kinds of specialized courts and just, having some kind of solution that doesn't just involve forum shopping and venue selection and the left running to their favorite judges who claim to have the jurisdiction for nationwide injunctions or jurisdiction out in international waters, for crying out loud. I mean, some of these things that are just so clearly ridiculous maybe are a solution. But, and I know that we've talked about this in recent weeks, but I want to just circle back, if we can, to Justice Roberts saying, the response to this type of judge, Judge Boasberg in particular, isn't impeachment. It's the appellate system. And yet, what I see from that is not just a measure of judicial restraint as opposed to activism. It's judicial reluctance, because this doesn't often just go up quickly to the Supreme Court and get overturned on appeal. Sometimes, that takes a while to get there. And so when he's not providing a solution saying, this is wrong, and and I get that you don't need to impeach. We will pull this from the docket and deal with this directly at our level, or take some kind of ownership. And the Supreme Court can do that. I mean, there's nothing stopping them from that. They don't have to sit there and just, wait and say, well, cases arise on to us, whatever. He's not providing any sort of solution except, well, the beatings will continue until morale improves. I mean, that was basically the message that I got from what he said.
No, I think that's a pretty clear message. And the problem that we have with the Supreme Court, as we are all too keenly aware, is that for every one opinion that they issue that we can all understand and is clear, there are 99 that are less than clear and decided on the narrowest grounds possible that open more questions than they actually answer. So the Supreme Court, for what it's meant to be, this final arbiter of what the law is in judicial interpretation, it rarely does that. Sometimes it raises more questions than it answers, and that creates problems for the next interpretation, for the next case. And so even the Supreme Court is not the answer to everything. But ultimately, I think that when it comes to these cases, when we're looking specifically at deportation cases, which is causing the biggest issue, it's judges move slowly, and that is the problem. They're moving slowly in how they're reviewing what are clearly bad decisions coming from judges at the trial level. It's the appellate system is moving too slowly, and they're not providing clarity, and they're frustrating people who want fast action. The flip side of that, however, is we also don't want to go to war with the judiciary. We don't want to put the judiciary in a position where they're too timid to challenge abuses, because now it's Donald Trump, but 8 years, 10 years from now, it could easily be, Gavin Newsom or someone else who is imposing upon us rules or procedures that are blatantly unconstitutional. But by then we have judges who are too timid to stand up for our rights. So we do need checks on the judiciary. We do need reform of the judiciary. But I think going to war with the judiciary is dangerous in the long term because it creates just as many problems as it solves in the short term.
And in the last 2 minutes we have with you, there was a hearing this morning before Judge Boasberg on the Trump's administration use of the Enemy Aliens Act, and this was the whole question about the deportation of these Tren de Aragua members, and this was the same judge who said turn the flight around and all of that. And so, what was the purpose of that hearing, and where are we at now post this hearing?
Well, the hearing today with Boasberg is to determine what the government actually did in response to the court's order. So exactly what you said, when the judge ordered the flights to be turned around, where were the flights? Were they within U.S. airspace where that could happen? Were they within international airspace where it's questionable? Or were they over some other sovereign country where, the judge's orders have zero validity? I think it's a very narrow question for Boasberg asking to see whether the government at all tried to comply with his orders. It's not about the bigger case. It's not about the bigger picture. It's a very narrow issue. And that ultimately still leaves a lot to be decided in that case, including even the underlying use of the Enemy Aliens Act and whether it provides sufficient safeguards on deportations. We don't have a ruling on that. That's yet to be determined. And in fairness to the judge, we don't know how he'll rule on that. What is concerning is this hyper-focus on what the executive is doing and trying to intrude into the process the executive branch uses to make very important policy decisions and negotiate some of these arrangements with foreign countries. That's a concern because the judge is overreaching when he's asking about the deliberative process, when he's asking about state secrets. And it'll be interesting to see if the judge persists with those questions today, notwithstanding the government's assertion of privilege.
Yeah, and I think there's a fundamental problem with this sort of threshold question of whether the government had a good faith basis in saying it couldn't comply with the order, when the order itself, there may be a problem with subject matter jurisdiction or simply overreach. And so was that raised at all, that the government is saying, well, wait a minute, whether we could or couldn't comply shouldn't be the threshold question. It should be whether this order was ultimately lawfully given or not anyway.
Correct. And that's, I hate to say it, but that, and there's one other thing that the administration is not arguing that it could be arguing in some of these cases. It's that when you have this injunctive release, there usually has to be a bond that's posted, and that's never been called into question by the government because none have been in any of these cases. But you're absolutely right. The threshold question is whether the court should even be hearing this to issue these orders, not the technical issue of where were the planes located. But I think from a political perspective, the government does want to address that because it shows how far the court is going outside of the bounds of what it's supposed to do. So it's a good argument for the government, for the Trump administration, to push on because it shows the court is being interested more in political issues than in legal ones.
And maybe then this judge is perhaps unwittingly or he knows, but he thinks he's going to just win anyway. He's sort of playing into some of that evidence that people like Congressman Brandon Gill and others who are filing impeachment paperwork against him may use as evidence in furtherance of more of a political bias rather than simply confining himself to a judicial review. So Gerard Folletti, we got to leave it there, but always appreciate your commentary. And I think this is going to be a fascinating question moving forward for the Trump administration. I hope that their lawyers are firing on all cylinders and challenging every issue and not, dropping any, so that they can continue to preserve the legitimacy of the executive to determine policy. I mean, that's what we all voted for. But have a very happy Friday. You should follow Gerard Folletti at Gerard Folletti on X. You should also follow Katie Faust, my guest earlier, on X. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net. Don't forget to listen to On Demand as well today at afr.net.